As winter approaches, you have two options for your dahlias. You can leave them in the ground or dig them up. You might want to leave them in the ground if you live in a mild area and have free draining soil, but mulch over the top with leaves, bark or compost just to give them some extra protection. In heavy soil, which is what I have, there's a risk of rot, so I dig mine up and store them dormant. If you have the space, you can also dig them up and keep them growing in a warm conservatory or greenhouse. At the end of the growing season, people generally wait for the first frost before digging them up, but it's not essential. They're not going to grow any bigger after the end of October, so any time in November is okay. An important point before you start digging them up though, remember to label your dahlias if you have more than one variety, because they all look the same when they're stored dormant. I cut the stems to about 6 inches above ground level, then dig them up with a fork, making sure not to damage the tuber. If you're going to keep it growing all winter, then pot it up straight away and place it in a cool but frost-free location, such as a greenhouse or a conservatory. Or if you have lots of plants, you can store them dormant for the winter, which is what I do and which is what we're going to show you now. So we cut the stems down, we dig them up and we remove most of the soil. Store them upside down for a few days so they can dry off. At this point, some people dust their tubers with sulphur powder to prevent rot over winter. Once they're dry, place them in a tray and cover them with old compost, or new if you don't have any old, just as long as they're covered with something that will stop them drying out. Check them through the winter every month or so, and if they're starting to dry out and shrivel up and lose their plumpness, give the compost a sprinkling of water. If you find any that have gone mouldy or rotten, throw them away. I store mine in the shed, where it gets down to a few degrees below 0 centigrade in the winter. You could keep them in the loft, basement, bin cupboard, greenhouse, cold frame, just somewhere they won't be freezing and wet like they would be in the ground. In the spring, you should start thinking about starting them into growth. If you have somewhere to grow them on, such as a greenhouse, then you can pot them up before they start growing. As long as the tuber is covered with soil, it doesn't really matter what container they are in at this point. You could also just water the tray they've been stored in to encourage growth. Once the days warm up, you'll start to see signs of life. Shoots will appear from the tuber, and it'll be okay to plant it out in the garden after the last frost in your area. Propagation. Once the shoots look like this, then you can also propagate some more plants quite easily. Cut off a new shoot that's about 3 or 4 inches long, making sure you get a bit of the tuber at the base of the shoot. If you cut off anything longer than this, it might not take, because once the shoot has gone hollow, which is what the mature stems do, then it won't take as a cutting. So we trim off the lower leaves, and dip the cut end in hormone rooting powder, which is a couple of pounds from your local garden centre. Place the cuttings around the edge of a pot. I just use multi-purpose compost, but you may find better results using a specialist cutting compost. Make sure you label the variety if you're propagating more than one type. You can either put the pot in a bag after watering it and keep indoors until you see growth, or if you have a heated propagator, then just place the pot in there and make sure it doesn't dry out. You can plant these cuttings out in around July or August, or sooner if they're strong enough, and they should flower in the autumn. You can also grow dahlias from seed, but you're not guaranteed to get an identical plant to the one you took the seed from. Do not pick the spent seed heads when they are still wet like this one, as the seed are not ready. You need to wait for the seed heads to dry out completely, then it's easy to get the seeds. If it's too wet outside for the seed heads to dry out, or too near winter for them to have time to, then I have seen people pick the spent flower heads and keep them in a glass of water or a vase until the head dries out and the seeds form. I hope this has been useful to you. Happy dahlia growing.